right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for December 2nd, 2024. We have three study items on our agenda tonight. Item number 1 is the adoption of the 2024 Model Traffic Code. Item number 2 is natural medicine regulation, and item number 3 is unclaimed property. And we will start our meeting as we usually do with public comment. There's no one signed up to speak here in the City Council chambers. I did have one speaker that called in via Zoom, Jason Sloan. I don't know if Mr. Sloan is on the line with us tonight, but he wants to talk about an ADA issue at the Wheat Ridge Rec Center. And just so that everyone is clear on this, on study sessions, we only take comment on items that are on the agenda. So, Mr. Sloan, if you're listening in, thank you for very much. We'd love to hear about the ADA issues at the Wheat Ridge Rec Center. But if you will call in 1 week from tonight at our regular meeting, we'd be glad to hear your comments. But they are not germane tonight. So we will go on to our first agenda item, and this is the adoption of the 2024 Model Traffic Code. But before I do that, I'd like to have the record note that all of our counselors are here tonight. Thank you, everyone. 100% attendance. Again, great council. Thank you. We've got some great guests with us tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we have not our city manager, but not our deputy city manager, but we have our Director of Community Development, Director Mikulak. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to you.
Yes. Thank you. For our first item on Model Traffic Code, we have Chief Murtha and Division Chief Kellogg.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. The Model Traffic Code is a necessary and important document for the police department. However, I can only imagine the anxiety you have of reading 5,000 pages of traffic law. Chief Kellogg will give you a brief synopsis on this, but know that we worked with the Office of Law for months on this to go through each line. And to sum it up, and from my perspective, what this accomplishes is making sure that we are in compliance with state law and state rules and regulations, and that the motoring public and our bicycling public and our walking public have an expectation across the state as to what the rules and regulations will be. That doesn't prohibit us from adding to those in certain ways, but this is only about that. So I know some of you have other traffic issues that you'd like to talk about, and that would certainly be in the future through Mr. Goff, but I'll let Division Chief Kellogg sum up the work that he did. It's my pleasure to be able to give him this project.
Very good. Thank you for the time. This, as the chief noted, was a lengthy process of vetting the ordinances that we have in place to make sure that they comport and comply with the state and their requirements, and that it also aligns with the new Model Traffic Code, the 2024 Model Traffic Code. And I'm actually really proud to say that there was only one deletion, for lack of a better term, that we will have to make, which we haven't used in several years. So basically, it just allows us to kind of clean up the books and make it align with the state ordinance, the state Model Traffic Code. There were a few nuances, a few changes to the code that I outlined in the memo that specifically addressed some of the issues that we were seeing with, or that the state was seeing with the e-bikes. There are new rules that identify just flat out, it says you cannot have a cell phone in your hands while you're driving, that you have to use the hands-free services, and it will, and I believe will certainly assist with some of the safety issues that we were having. There are some minor fee changes that really are specific to the e-bikes and the new e-bike laws and the new cell phone laws. And then there are some nuanced language as it results, or as it relates to the levels of automation for vehicles that are, that have that automation opportunities, and some minor language changes as it relates to the specs on commercial motor vehicle technology that is new here in the last 4 to 5 years. So really, there's minor changes, but I think they're great changes, and I think there are things that we can utilize moving forward as we adopt the 2024 Model Traffic Code.
Happy to take any questions if you have them on the model traffic code specifically.
Counselor Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your work on this. I actually did read the entire thing. It gave me a headache.
Yes.
But the only, I had, you know, what we had in our action packet was from the state. We didn't have like a redlined like version of our ordinances. So I wonder when we do go to first reading, if a redlined version could potentially be added so that we could look at what those, you know, minor changes were. And then my only other question is, sorry, I have 2 questions. There is a thing about scooters. So it's mentioned in several places, like in the beginning in like page 33, and then in the middle and on page 56. And it says that scooters you can be no more restrictive on scooters than Class 1 e-bikes. And I guess I'm just asking, like, do we allow scooters on like sidewalks and in bike lanes and multimodal trails? Because I know that there are a lot of students at the high school, since that bus line has ended, that utilize electric scooters to get to school, and like kind of the smaller Class 1 e-bikes. And so I just wanted to see where we're at with that.
As I was looking, sorry, sir. As I was looking at this, we when we pulled the data, we haven't enforced a lot of those laws, but specifically for that reason. We're talking about young men and women trying to get to school, so we haven't really addressed those. This summer we did have some challenges, and as you read through, you probably saw that they identified different classes of those e-bikes and scooters, and so those Class 3s are remarkably fast and remarkably powerful. And so what I could see, and we did have some challenges this summer in some of our parks and some of the green space parks that I think we're going to need to start addressing. We did have some complaints about some of the speed on the sidewalks. Those Class 3s will go 30 miles an hour, so we are going to address that. The Class 1s and the Class 2s don't go above 20 miles an hour. But I still think 20 miles an hour is something that we still need to start paying attention to. So the answer to your question is we haven't started to enforce, but as these things become more common, I could see us doing a little bit more work that way.
I'll just add that we have had complaints in the Greenbelt about some of these conflicts between walkers, joggers, and these scooters. So we are taking a look at it, but it'll be an educational campaign well before we get to citing anybody. And certainly our SROs will be in the school to discuss the different classes. Right now, I think people just buy them and they just assume it's all one class of scooters. So we need to get behind that before we would take harsh enforcement action on that, and just let people know that there are concerns and liabilities that go with each of those. As far as the red line version, when we come back, we'll have to, we will, as a matter of course, have to come back and make changes with council approval. So you will get the old version and the red line compared to what the new version is and how that changes. So, and that will only be, I think, only in the one that we changed. So it's not going to be it won't be a heavy lift for reading. Your day will be uncluttered in the future.
Awesome. And then in the state, it seemed to address the site triangle on page 35, number 114. It was addressing like vision from the corner spaces. Now we have, as a future study session coming up, site triangles. And so I just wonder if we're adopting this model and it addresses the site triangle, then we don't necessarily need to make those change, like it'll be addressed with adopting the new 2024 regulations?
If you feel like the ordinance, that the state law is mirrors what you want, then yes, you won't have to adopt it. We would just incorporate that into our traffic code, into our traffic ordinances, and we would cite those folks accordingly or monitor that accordingly. But I would suggest that this doesn't restrict you from doing certain other things if you want to go beyond some of the scope here. It's just that we have to align at the base of these things.
Okay, and then just one last thing, at the very end, they liked to say, they said, within 30 days of the publication, and then they said you had to put it in like a newspaper, like what's our plan for the publication restrictions that they have in the.
Right. So I've already talked with our PAO about that. We'll utilize his various resources to make sure that our public our community is aware that we've adopted this. These are the changes you should be aware of. The state is also pretty active right now, or very active right now in publicizing some of those. So they're going to get it from a couple different sources.
Well, no, and the reason why I bring up the 30 days piece is because typically when we adopt an ordinance, we said it within 15 days of adoption. And so I'm bringing that up, that we're going to have to make sure that we are addressing our normal language to change it within 30 days.
Yeah, we discussed that. I discussed that with the attorney, and we are going to make that change when we will address that when we send the final version to you.
Awesome, thanks for the great work.
Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your hard work, Division Chief and Chief. Actually, Councilor Hoppy just hit my one question on the notifications and public notifications, so thank you. You good? Sure.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you both for this work. I'm going to admit I did not read all of the attached document. I did read the entire memo and I did cross-reference some things, but so I just want to give some kudos to Councilmember Hoppy for her thoroughness. I guess there's just a couple things I want to bring forward since they're in the memo. As someone who rode a Class 3 e-bike to get here tonight, you can't tell. In fact, my e-bike looks like a bike. It doesn't even look like it until you look at me going fast on a bike, and then you suspect it's an e-bike. So I think, there's a huge issue with you cannot visually identify what's Class 2, Class 1 and Class 3 look the same. Right. It's a matter of speed. And I think, so as we're talking about regulating types of usage, it's really difficult to enforce the Class 3, but enforcing reasonable speed limits and trail behavior is uniform for all trail users. Right. So I think this is really an opportunity for us, just to be looking at speed and discourteous behavior on the trails in general. I want to flag what is not called out in here, and this is a little uncomfortable for me as a professional bike advocate and who someone would like to be expanding access and usage for bikes. I find Class 2 e-bikes to be the real problem in our community. So for my peers who may not be up to speed on all of the regulations on the classes, a Class 2 e-bike is an e-bike that actually has a throttle assist. You can propel it without actually pedaling. And it's supposed to have a speed governor on it that prohibits it from going over 20 miles an hour. However, there's a huge influx of product coming into the United States, and some of it produced here in the state of Colorado, that is being sold as a Class 2 e-bike to the general public that does not have the speed governor on it. And so what you'll see is a lot of what someone has purchased thinking it's a Class 2 e-bike, but in fact it goes over 20 miles an hour because it doesn't have the speed governor. And those e-bikes, because the minute it goes over 20 miles an hour, it is no longer an e-bike, it's a moped. They are traveling on our sidewalks, they are traveling on our trails, and they are more dangerous. They're heavier, and there is a huge proliferation of these that go over 20 miles an hour. I'm glad to see we're looking at the age in which you can ride these, but I just want to flag for conversation in here that Enforcement of class 2 to me is far more dangerous because they are heavier, they go faster, and people are regulating the class 3 because technically they can go up to 28 miles an hour. And so that's where we're seeing that speed differential for safety. But the removal of the speed governor on the class 2 is actually far more of a safety issue for both the rider and the other people in the shared right of way. So I just want to flag that for the police department as you are looking at programming priorities. And as you're taking, data from the community when you get called out for an incident, I'd like to just start paying attention to class 2 also, because a lot of them go faster than 20 miles an hour, in which case they're technically on a moped, and then they should be regulated like a moped and not a bicycle. And then other than that, I did not read all however many 100 pages. So the rest of this stuff looks good. I'm glad to see that the handheld requirement is in here around cell phones. That is one of the most dangerous conditions on our streets today, and hopefully enforcement of that. I do have a question, and you kind of touched on it. So when stuff like this comes in, how do you prioritize how you respond to new regulations in terms of because you're not out enforcing all laws all the time, you identify what's most important. So how does adoption of this, what's the process after that for the police department to evaluate and prioritize?
Yeah, so when we get this infrequently as it comes along, we'll look at those things that we see mirror the community complaints or community concerns. What you discussed with respect to e-bikes is sort of this, they've been around for a while, but it's a new frontier still as far as understanding the different types and how people are evolving them and how small shops, large companies in China, different places are making these. And to your point, it is impossible to just say, okay, unless we're out there with a radar gun that we know the speed of these bikes, which is really the one way we could tell if it's in violation. But even so, if you're driving down a hill and you've got a pedal assist bike or whatever, that could change things. But we will find people that come in conflict, if there's accidents, if there's collisions, and certainly then there would be an enforcement action. But as far as your greater question, we look at what mirrors the values of the community and then see how we can use those to our advantage. So wherever we see a change in the law, like the cell phone change, I think we hear from people all the time about driving behaviors because we are a driving community. We have so many major thoroughfares and cut-through streets. So if there's something that produces safety in that environment, we're all ears about that, as opposed to something that might be a change to the way somebody loads their vehicle or something like that, which I'm not saying we wouldn't, but we only have so many resources, so we're prioritizing those things that we see most often. And for us, it's driving behaviors when it comes to this law anyway, and that is either not paying attention or because if you've seen all the officers that get, getting hit on the roadways, that's not just a safety issue for us. Anybody who changes their tire now on the highway is at greater risk than ever. So we would prioritize those things that we deem and we hear from you and the community are important to you. It's the same as we went through with the automated speed enforcement. It wouldn't be an issue if we didn't, if we were just left to our own devices, we would say, okay, these are the things that are important. When we see the community reaching out and saying, hey, speed is a problem, we want to do something more in the neighborhoods, we have to find a solution to that. So that's how we prioritize it, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Weaver.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. Could we, living in the back 40 of Wheat Ridge, I've seen everything come down 38th Avenue, driven. And it seems to me that, and I'm one of those people, I have a 49cc gas-powered scooter that you sit on, that you don't stand on. And of course, I got that a long time ago, and there were specific regulations around that. And I just think there's a lot of misunderstanding on what people can drive where. And so I would just request that we have signage in the parks, on the streets, about where you ride certain things in certain places. Because even my 49cc scooter, I cannot drive on a sidewalk. I cannot drive it in the parks. I have to drive it, it's street legal. But I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding for people who are buying these things. Even the recommendation of when do people take the motorcycle and class and all of that. But even if it's just a sheet or something that just goes out in some of our major places, just as a heads up, so that, because I would like to see people notified, possibly ticketed. It's a huge problem, especially on some of our really dark streets. And so thanks, and thanks for your work on this.
Yep. I would say that education, I think there are so many different types of transport now. If you go back to the old days of a moped or, a mini bike that you might have made in your garage, whatever. And we've evolved to now this is, this is corporate business. People don't understand, when do we have to register it? When do we need, can we register, can we insure it but not register it? There are certain times you can do that. So there is tons of misinformation. I think our PIO is going to be focused on that once we adopt this. I think that we're going to look to put VMS boards and signage out in places where we see violations. And I'm envisioning, in the summer, us setting up sort of a safety checkpoint on some of our more useful trails to at least inform the people, not to try and, cause a riot down there, but to pull people and say, hey, that shouldn't be on this.
Yeah.
And this is where you can ride it, and have a flyer to hand to those folks where we can. So that's, I think, where this space is going to drive us this summer to be doing more around that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I didn't have a chance to read the entire thing, the entire 237-page document, but it was interesting what I did, and I did reference back and forth. But in your staff memo there, I appreciate the way you opened it, that the reason we go through this exercise is to define and create reasonably uniform traffic codes for all Coloradans. So if you drive from one town to another, you're not going to be faced with something that's completely different in terms of the traffic laws, the signals there, and the signage and whatnot is all fairly standardized. And that's why we have model traffic codes. And I think it's very important that we understand we're not just doing this to make some changes. I won't belabor the class of electric bicycles any longer, but I did want to mention that I know, at the end, at the conclusion of the memo, you do mention that it is, the timing of this is such that the model traffic code will be discussed and come before council, and that right now, during this period, it's not the appropriate time to address significant changes or changes locally to our city traffic code, and that subsequent changes can be made, and I have certainly taken that into consideration. I do have a question on cell phone. I'm sure this will come up. And this is something, and I'm sure that you guys have probably already looked at, and police department is considering, but this idea of hands-free versus holding the phone versus holding the phone out like a platter versus what would be considered a violation, and what is simply using your phone to communicate.
So I chatted with a few different folks, in particular some of the legislators that wrote this, and the notation is, or the idea is, that there will be no cell phones in anybody's hands moving forward. So the understanding is that even these folks holding the phone and talking into the speaker would not be appropriate. To have both hands on the wheel or available to do whatever you have to do as you're driving is the intent of the changes to the law.
So if you have your phone on the console and it's on speaker, and you're not actually holding the phone, you'd be okay.
Yes.
Likewise, your car, your in-car connection with your Bluetooth, and that would be okay. Right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. And I think it's important to emphasize the reason that we have to do these sorts of things is that distracted driving is something that is simply not acceptable anymore. There are so many cases of accidents, and I'm sure there are statistics that any one of us could look up and see the cause of a number of accidents, serious accidents, that are caused simply by distracted driving. These people are sober, they haven't been drinking or anything else, but they were distracted on their phone because when you're talking on your phone, even with hands-free, it is a distraction, and if you're in a discussion with somebody that maybe becomes heated or whatever, you could take your mind off the first most important thing you're doing at the time, and that is driving your car. So I'm very pleased to see that we are putting this into our, not just the state of Colorado, but this will be part of our Wheat Ridge community. This is what we in Wheat Ridge believe is important. Pay attention to your driving and put the phone down.
Thank you. Any additional questions or discussions? Counselor Snell?
Just a brief one, thank you. And thank you for the work. I know this is probably not the most exhilarating work, but it's important and appreciate it. I was reading, I'm just a little curious about headlamps and headlights specifically, and brightness. And I find myself doing this a lot in the dark, at night when you encounter certain vehicles. So there wasn't anything specifically about brightness on this, and I did a little bit of research, and apparently there was something that I read about statewide. It can be a Class A charge if there's something that is super bright or not white or like off-white. Can you just say a little bit more about how that could affect us?
Yeah, there's a certain level of lumens that the headlamps can't go over. The challenge with that is it's hard to measure because we don't walk around with that kind of gear with us on a regular basis, and so it's kind of, I almost think it's similar to a Supreme Court decision that came up about art, right? You know it when you see it. And that is kind of the impression. Sorry. Well, I don't want to go too far into the. Well, anyway, that.
All right.
Boy, I got right down to the weeds on that, Mayor. Sorry about that.
I'm going to gavel you down on that one.
Sorry, sir. But the point that was made when I read the discussion, it's hard to say exactly, or it's hard to identify specifically it's a violation or not, but you know it when you see it. And we have made a few stops on those types of things. Some of the vehicles that are, and in particular when we do our racing operations, a lot of those vehicles have these remarkably bright lights, these additionally bright lights, and they just love to have everything on, and so we're able to deal with that from the level of lumens and so on and so forth. And as a matter of fact, in the September operation, we actually seized 3 cars based on that. So, yeah. Well, we seized at least one of the 3 cars based on that, I should say. Mm-hmm. Right.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the report. I tried to read as much as I could. It's good to read. I had a couple questions. I want to get on the 2 things. One, I want to get on the bike bandwagon. I definitely agree with Councilmember Hulteen that it is definitely the behavior. As I bike a lot along the Clear Creek, it's the bikes. I do get nervous about the heavy bikes coming really fast. And I think, as far as I know, I've always been told that driving it's a privilege, not a right. But when it comes to bikes, since there's no driver's license, I guess it must be a right. And you also don't need any insurance because you don't need a driver's license. And that poses some liability for those pedestrians that are, doing the right thing and they're where they're supposed to be. And then you have this bike, very heavy bike coming very, very fast. Probably, no ID, no insurance. I'm just curious if you, and this might be a little bit higher up, have you heard anything ever of the state, saying like, hey, it might be time that on these e-bikes that we need to get those licensed because this poses a higher liability than just, someone, pedaling with their feet.
So our CACP, the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police, when they were starting these conversations a while back in 2022, I believe it was, we're discussing some of those things. They do have requirements when we're talking about certain CCs of motorcycles that you have to have a license, and they were discussing whether they needed to start applying some of that here. In this version of the model traffic code, they did not address that, but they are aware, and I think they are looking to address that in the future. You may have more information about that than I do, because I think you're part of that group that we consult with.
I would weigh in on one thing as well. There is a lobby that doesn't want the restrictions on these vehicles right now, that seems to be pushing back pretty hard against the regulations that might come up for various reasons. I mean, the intent, I think, from some of them is that, hey, we want to take cars off the road, and we want to put people on bicycles or less impactful modes of transportation. And then certainly there are folks in this for the profit game of it. But there's competing interests all across, and I think that's really where government struggles sometimes. Not this government, but government in general struggles to deal with those different competing interests, and we didn't address it. It didn't get addressed here is the bottom line. Will it get addressed in the future? I guess it's going to take it's going to take some willpower and maybe some examples, but we've seen people who have been struck by motorized bicycles, and that is a concern. I think because they're in such close proximity sometimes to kids who might make a left turn in a second, and being on that path with a kid like that and not understanding that, hey, I better slow down. This could be a quick turn or something. Doesn't resonate with everybody. So. This is an uncharted space right now. It's not well regulated. This is a step in the right direction, but we've got a ways to go.
Thank you.
And then Councilor Hulteen had a follow-up.
Thanks. I'll be quick with this. I think to your point, Chief, this is why it's really important to get the right data, which is why I brought up bringing in the Class 2 bikes, because I think, I'm actually no longer with Bicycle Colorado. I'm not as in the know as I was, but I think what we're talking about here is really highlighting that, e-bikes are not going to go away. We live in a state that has tax rebates for anyone who wants to buy an e-bike. So there's a big push for them. I think in our community, it's important for us to be tracking the data around what type of vehicle it is. Until we have better on-road options for people on e-bikes. I mean, I rode my bike on the sidewalk a little bit to get here because it's the safest way for me to ride on 44th Avenue at night. So I think that's what we're going to have to be paying attention to. But I agree, like the conflict between a bicyclist on class 2s are just heavier because they have additional motor because they're throttle. So like they are about 20 to 30% at least heavier than like my class 3 e-bike. So they're heavier, and they tend to be, a lot of times they're people who weren't typically riding a bike beforehand because they don't require pedaling. Oh. And so you have people who haven't, learned how to ride a bike and learn how to navigate. And so not to just keep throwing at class 2, but I think that kind of data is going to really help us know where do we need to focus that when it comes to local things we want to do, but then as part of informing statewide regulation in this space. I mean, I do see there's probably an inevitable, if we're starting to say you can't ride an e-bike if you're under 16, like we're starting to make these differentiations, so we go down there. So I think to the best of your ability to track that data is going to really help us all make good decisions later. So I just really appreciate it.
As somebody who sits with CACP, I think if we can get them to change the form at the state level to include a box there, a drop down that says was this collision involving a motorized e-bike and what type would help statewide instead of us trying to ad hoc do it. I will say we have 2 e-bikes in the police department, and our training is not just here you go, it's a bike. It's very similar to our bicycle training, which is rigorous, because some of these folks haven't been longtime riders, and the ones who are way ahead of the game, and the folks who are just getting on this for the first time do not understand the physics and dynamics of using a bike, and quite frankly, it's just different, and you have to get used to it. Like skiing down a hill, you know, you'd want to do that a few times before you just go straight down. So we're teaching ourselves, and maybe we'll extend that to the school, do a little bike rodeo, things like that, to try and get our folks to understand that this is a different type of transportation than they've ever had before.
We'll get them early because, you know, like skiing, you never forget how to do it. You just pick it right up.
I don't know.
Isn't that true? All right. All right. Well, thank you very much for bringing this forward. Great presentation, great set of questions. This will be coming forward as an ordinance on first reading for more consideration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Have a good evening. Be safe out there. Okay. With that, we will go to agenda item number 2, and this is a discussion of natural medicine regulation, not national medicine regulation, natural medicine regulation.
Yes, and for that discussion, tonight we have City Attorney Mr. Dahl.
Well, thank you. Good evening. And as Rocky and Bullwinkle would say, now for something completely different. Few people get that reference. That's great. It's wonderful.
Oh, I thought
Okay.
they said moose and squirrel.
Moose and Squirrel. Well, no, that was, come on, name the character. That was,
Bullwinkle.
no,
Rocky
Moose and Squirrel. That was,
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
that was the Russian spy.
Well,
There, thank
well,
you very much.
Okay.
There we go. All right. 10 points to,
In our
10,
in our
10
Soviet
points to the
Soviet
man
history.
from District 4. Well done. So you have a short memo from me, and you also have a much longer state statute that was enacted that permits, in fact, I think encourages the use of natural medicines, and there's a list of what those are, and I have that in the statute here, but the kind of the lost leader, the thing that gets the most attention, or I think probably got the most attention at the legislature, was psilocybin mushrooms. So from the 60s, 70s era, you'll recall those were big, and now they're back. So fine. Basically, what I'm here to do is to give you a few high points around what that statute does and what it allows the city to, and what it prohibits the city from doing around the regulation of natural medicine, and get some guidance from you. I provided more than 3 doors. I'm sorry, there are, I think, 5 options in terms of action. We'll get to those in a second. Well, the statute defines what natural medicine is. Among other things, it includes, as I said, the psilocybin mushrooms, but goes on to include, among other things, mescaline, if recommended by the board. So there's a range of things that are, and I will say, it's not in the memo, but I'll say it's being recognized, at least in the literature, that it is of value, or these treatments are of value for persons experiencing PTSD and other forms of mental disturbance. But it does involve, to be blunt, taking a trip, because you take, that's an LSD trip, as a trip. Same thing is true here. You don't go to the medical office and get your shot and then you're discharged, you go home. If you're going to take a mushroom trip, then that's going to be a few hours that you're going to be under that influence. And so that's really, I think, one thing that some jurisdictions out there are wrestling with in terms of how it should be regulated. But in any event, the statute doesn't require local governments to enact any kind of local regulation, but it says if you do, you can't have a regulation that effectively prohibits the use of these treatments, or prohibits persons who are licensed facilitators to operate in your jurisdiction. But what you can do is regulate time, place, and manner of the use of these facilities. And we're used to that terminology in the sign code arena, right? Time, place, and manner, but not content. You know, we do that for sign code. Here, the time, place, and manner would be what zone districts. Within those zone districts, what kind of spacing limitations, so that's a place. Time limitations, how late can you first start a session such that you're able to end it while there's still staff around, as opposed to starting a session at 6 o'clock and are there staff around and so when should there are some jurisdictions that are regulating that. Manner is pretty broad. I've reviewed for example, some jurisdictions have really gotten into this. Boulder has, Frederick has up north, and I read their ordinance, pretty well written, the other day, and it gets into, it actually establishes a city licensing system, which you could do, and the analogy would be the medical marijuana and retail marijuana licensing that you engage in. And remember that in those regulatory programs, you engage in location, spacing, ventilation, security, video recording of what goes on, disposal of waste, et cetera. So you can get really pretty detailed in terms of the regulation of natural medicines. On the second page of the memo, I said, after all of this, what are the city's choices? And I'll tell you that there are some jurisdictions that are saying, look, the state regulatory program, because you've got to get a state license from a newly created state board that has been issuing regulations and is enabled to start issuing state licenses as of the first of the year. The state will not issue a license if it's in a location or in a manner that is not allowed locally. So they do allow you a role. But there are some jurisdictions, for example, Idaho Springs has said, you know, our view is that the state regulatory program is pretty robust. We're not going to enact anything locally. We're going to see how things evolve. Perfectly acceptable approach. So the do nothing approach, and some have done that. In the little list of approaches that I've suggested are alternatives for the city on the second page of the memo. So the first, almost the first low-hanging fruit is, well, in the zoning regulations, define what the healing centers are and say what zone districts they can be in. And good enough. And we do that, when you think about it, for a lot of other uses. We don't get into detail on what an auto parking use ought to look like, and we don't license it, but we say, here's where it can be. So that's kind of sort of almost a first step. As I said, the communities that choose to do this, they typically allow healing centers where medical office uses are allowed. And I've got our zone district, our code here, so I can tell you where medical offices are allowed. And when we get to the questions, I'm happy to pull that. You can further limit the location, door number 2 here, of healing centers, whether by zone district or distance limitations. And I will point out, the state statute already says nothing within 1,000 feet of a school, daycare, and a couple of other minor meaning minor persons related uses. You are not allowed to increase those numbers so as to prohibit the use. So you can't say within a mile or whatever and effectively zone them out. This door number 2, the best analogy I can think of is adult businesses that typically, or very often, local governments will say, yes, permitted in the IE district only. And that's perfectly fine. You're still allowing the community. You could approach natural medicine healing centers in the same way if you chose. You can limit the times of day, and this is something you could layer on. So these are not all, pick one and you're done. You could certainly mix and match here a little bit and do more than one of the 5 things I've mentioned. So time of day restrictions, other restrictions, and this would be odor, ventilation, you know, the video cameras, all the other things that Frederick, for example, is doing. Or door number 5, which would be require a city license and get into the licensure business of the business of licensing these operations. That will take more staff time, honestly, and it will require that we devote someone locally to do that. If it would be helpful, Lauren put together at her suggestion, I think it's good, where the schools, daycares, and schools and daycares, right?
Yes, this map illustrates the 1,000-foot buffer around schools and daycares that is included in the state statute. And then the blue shading represents our commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning, where medical office uses are currently a permitted use. So it would give you a sense of where these new facilities could go if we were to regulate them similarly to MOBs.
So they couldn't go in the pink circles.
Correct.
Because those are 1,000-foot circles.
Correct.
If the city were to say, okay, only in commercial, industrial, mixed use, it would be only in the blue. And where the blue is intersected with the pink, not there either, if you're following that. And you could crank it down even further if you wish. But what's interesting to me is different cities have really taken very different approaches on this based on social policy. I went to the CML City Attorney Seminar. They have a fall seminar always, pardon me, and there was a panel on this particular bill. And the panel members were a city attorney from Boulder, which has really embraced this and gotten into local licensing in a really detailed way, and the city attorney from Parker, who's in the direction he had gotten from his city council was, you know, do the minimum, and I think they had gone with a zone district, here's where it can be and we're done approach. So that represents the two widely separated poles, and you can be anywhere in the middle of that. I'm happy to answer questions. The net, I assume, would be direction to do an ordinance on around one of these doors or not at all. One consideration, and then I'm done with my presentation, that you should think about is this: to the extent the state actively starts issuing licenses, and there's a question about how fast they'll really start producing these, but I suppose it's possible sometime in January the state could issue a license to someone who has a storefront somewhere here in Wheat Ridge, or has a rental property, whatever, and they could have a license in that location prior to your having acted to say, no, that's not a location, not in that zone district. That would become a legal nonconforming use if you were later to say, not in that zone district. You could later impose all sorts of time and place kinds of time, place, and manner restrictions other than the location itself to say, okay, that's fine, you get to be there, non-conforming use, but we're now going to require ventilation, video, security, et cetera. That doesn't displace the use, and that would allow them to continue that operation. And you could layer on those requirements, but not in that location. So there are some communities that are saying, we at least ought to get our zoning act together pretty quickly so that we at least make sure that they're not going to pop up in areas we don't want them popping up. Thus ends my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, City Attorney Dahl. Lauren, can I just ask you, though, to your knowledge, if someone was a licensed therapist, they are allowed to, not that I would as a therapist, but they're allowed to session in their home, or is that only through Zoom? They're doing it in their home?
Yes, you're remembering correctly. We have a series of businesses classified as home occupations, where you can have a single sort of client in your home at a time. Let me pull up that code section to see how specific it gets about therapy specifically.
I mean, personally, would not bring someone that I was having therapy sessions with to my home, but I just was wondering if it was allowable. And I did read this one too, and it helped with the headache. So in my opinion, I personally think that, you know, it's being regulated through the state, through DOLA, I believe. And they are pretty strict. They stay pretty on top of making sure that people are within the regulations and within their licensure regulations. And the only thing I would maybe consider is requiring another additional municipal license, just so that they are beholden to our municipality, but the reality is they will already be licensed. So I don't know that it's worth our staff time. And so my opinion in this is that we really just do nothing at this point, let the state regulation take over and be the boss of this. I'm not opposed to looking at doing commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning. I mean, it seems to me like that's pretty much where it would end up anyways. So I don't know that we need actual more regulation to do that, so.
Thank you, Counselor Weaver.
Thanks. So what's different about this for me compared to cannabis and other things is that we're talking about therapy happening. And so for me, I would like to see this, since it's about medicinal purposes, I'd like to see it more with other medical facilities. I don't know if we have specific zone districts for that, but that would be my opinion. I'm not against home occupation of this kind of thing, but for some reason it feels, I am concerned, and I don't mean to be dark on this side, but it seems like there could easily be a loophole where this could be the problem that massage therapy places we've had in Wheat Ridge, because you've got clients coming in. Yes, they're there for supposedly a stated purpose, and I'm concerned because that sort of snuck up on us as well. I don't know if it snuck up on us, but because I think for a lot of us, sort of like, who would do that? Who would use their place not for the intended use that a lot of people would, right? Like, so I'm not so much needing another license. I think it's the awareness that this is a medicinal therapy, and we're talking about people having trips, to your point. So it's like massage therapy in the fact that there are a lot of sensitive things. So I don't know if video is appropriate. I don't know if I want to get into the regulation as a city. I'm just concerned on the spaces, to come back to what can we regulate? We can regulate the space. I'm concerned about if they are located in other places, that might open up more opportunity. So I guess I would be more for with other medical facilities, and then possibly something around the safety of clients is really what I'm thinking about, in terms of, because people can have really negative experiences, which is why this is a thing that is regulated by therapists who know this stuff. But I can also see, or maybe the state's handled it. I don't know if I'm really making myself clear about my concerns. I don't know if we want to just leave it without any regulation at all, since we've had some other issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. So could you remind me about the marijuana licensing do we require in the city of Wheat Ridge?
Yes, quite extensively. It's one of our specialty licenses, like tobacco retailers, medical marijuana. We have a couple different types of medical marijuana licenses. It was the start of a series of very specialized licenses, which resulted in the need for a new staff person to manage all of the specialty licenses that we've created recently. The details of which, thankfully, I don't know, because we have a cap on the number of marijuana businesses that we're allowed, so we haven't had to actually use that code section recently. But yeah, there's a few different license types and lotteries and requirements in Chapter 11.
That's the other thing that I want to talk about, is I would be in favor, I suggest we have a cap in the lottery, similar to marijuana, I think that just it kind of helps enforce, good neighbors, because I don't know where this is going to end up going if we don't have someplace specific and that way, if there's people waiting, it really helps them, to be a good neighbor wherever that business is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This reminds me a little bit, a few years ago, we had I think it was a business in Wheat Ridge that was doing like marijuana, but it was also like a yoga studio, but it was like mostly people mostly smoking marijuana and like sort of doing yoga. Whatever. I like Lauren's map here. I think that if we kind of stick to the commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning, where the blue is, and keeping most of the state stuff, because that's talking about 1,000 feet away from schools and other areas, I'm pretty comfortable with that. The only other thing that I would maybe look at regulating here would be the time of operation. So maybe having it be done by like 7 o'clock or something like that, because that seems to be like if you're talking about a therapy and something that's supposed to be for medical use, medical hours, I don't know many therapists are doing therapy at 10 o'clock at night, so something like that, this isn't, to me, if it was recreational use, mushrooms or whatever, then maybe we start talking about licensing and that sort of thing. But I think that the state can handle all of the medical stuff that goes along with this. But for us, I think we should look at where we have this, and I think the blue zones is fine, and then maybe stopping it by 7 o'clock. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hulteen.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Stites. I think the regulation from the state is addressing a lot of sort of the safety concerns. And this is, it's a new frontier for everybody. And I think what we want to do is find a balance so that it's not like we wake up, in June and all of a sudden every, vacant commercial space is all of a sudden a natural healing center. But I think we really just don't know. So I think over-regulation probably doesn't feel like the right approach. So I am in support of the commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning approach to it. So take a zoning approach. And I also like the limiting business hours. But I think beyond that, as somebody who's gone to just therapy, I mean, I don't want government in my therapy office, because I think that kind of counter indicates it. So I think the state's doing a good job in the practice regulatory aspect of it. And I think for us, we want to just balance, to what extent is this like percolating throughout our community. So I like the zoning restrictions. I support 7 o'clock as a cutoff hour. And I think other than that, I think we can take up other regulations as they come. And if something really seems to be coming fast and furious at us, we can do an emergency 30-day regulation on it and pick the conversation up then. So I am with Councilmember Stites.
Thank you. Councilor Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will echo some of my colleagues in their comments. I would prefer that we do regulate it, likely by zoning. My fear is if we do nothing, because it is a new frontier, that we're going to have medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and pushback from the community, as we saw with that new frontier. And I did have a question in regards to, like, how do we license other therapy, like, businesses in the city?
We do. It's not a custom license type, so they would just apply for a traditional business license and indicate that it's a medical office or a therapy office.
Okay, and so that if we were not to require a municipal license, then the state would handle that and we wouldn't know?
I believe they'd still have to obtain a traditional business license.
Okay.
You're still doing business in the city, whether you're selling e-bikes or whether you're providing, you're selling a service for money.
So we don't require any specialty licensing for therapy?
No.
Okay. Do we have the capacity to do any specialty licensing, like that person that was hired?
I think our licensing team is stretched pretty thin right now. So the idea of a specialty license for this particular use would probably warrant a follow-up conversation with them.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would be comfortable allowing this use within certain zones and having it operational during typical business hours that you would see with a relative therapy facility. And as issues come up, like Councilmember Hulteen said, that we can kind of address them as we learn more.
Thank you. Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to just echo what Councilmember Hoppy mentioned. The state's pretty stringent on these rules on the laws, as much as I've read about this. Excuse me. So I'm inclined to agree with the zoning restriction for sure, and that's really as far as I would be comfortable going. Just knowing how stringent the laws are going into this is new, and thinking and realizing that we can always come back to it if there's something that happens, but realizing that the zoning, not only does it designate where those businesses can open, it also, I think, legitimizes the business a little bit if they're in an office, a medical office park. So I see both sides of that. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, I guess, a little more of a fundamental question on this particular law that sets up licensing and brings the Revenue Department into that whole sphere. And how that, does it overlap or does it conflict with the existing law that basically decriminalized psychedelics back a few years ago, where under that law, it's no longer a crime to possess one of these natural medicines, to grow them on private property or gift them to individuals 21 and older. That to me says that your business would be a business offering a therapy, and then you would provide the psychedelics for no cost, and you would be allowed to do that. I guess it then gets into a question of sort of how do we manage the sales tax? How do we, because these things would be taxed, well, I don't know how they'd be taxed. So I have some basic questions about what the existing law says. It is no longer a crime to do this. You can grow your own. You can grow as much as you'd like within your property, and then give them for free to somebody that's you're providing therapy to, licensed therapy. And then, so, all right, let's talk about that when I do have a follow-up after that, though.
Well, my take is this, that the therapy that you're providing is a service that can be regulated. The fact that it's legal to grow them and to possess those medicines doesn't does not preclude the state, or for that matter, the city, from regulating the time, place, and manner of where therapy sessions can take place, and really get into the nature of how therapy is administered to people and to the general public. So I don't see a conflict. Pardon me, I just ate the wrong thing. I don't see a conflict between the ownership and use of these things is legal, and if you're going to offer therapy and be a facilitator and guide people through a trip in aid of their therapy, Councilmember Dozeman gets a kick out of that. Well, it's the language of the 70s. It's come back. It's back. But if you're going to do that, that's a set of functions, just like substance abuse clinics, and that can be regulated, and licenses can be required for them, and there can be regulations around how you provide that therapy. Perfectly comfortable in saying that both of those things can take place at the same time.
So, to me, it gets back to this idea of you're providing therapy, but you're also providing something.
Yeah.
You're not a glass of water, a glass of beer.
Yeah.
Whatever it is you're providing that person, but you're it's a perfectly okay to give that to them. And to me, it gets, again, a question of if these things are licensed and the Department of Revenue is involved, there doesn't seem to be any way of telling, okay, this person is providing therapy and he's charging $10, and this person is providing the same therapy and they're giving it away for free.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, and I think probably this is one where it'll be useful to see how this field evolves and how the state, especially since they've decided to own it, you own it when you adopt a statute that says this is all right and we're going to get into this business. It'll be interesting to see how they end up figuring out or deciding to charge tax on the tangible items that are sold as part of therapy and the therapy itself.
Right.
And it'll be interesting to see how individual therapists or facilitators choose to charge for their services. Nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to charge you $50 an hour for the service. I'm not layering into that the substance. If, you're going to a athletic massage therapist, they may well use oil, and they're not going to say, okay, it was 2 ounces of this. It's that much for that session. Or any other kind of therapy that happens to also include some associated medicine.
Right.
And I suspect that as those distinctions get made, the state will have to embrace them one way or another. It may not matter for the city, and I'm beginning to hear a consensus. I want to hear from everyone, but I'm beginning to hear a consensus around zoning and hours of operation. To the extent they're actually selling a specific item at retail, then that would fall within the city's sales tax ambit. But that's something that I'd like to see how that evolves, because I think I wouldn't want to anticipate a city sales tax description ordinance, and you don't have to yet. It's just not something that's time sensitive.
But it seems without a specific license for the city of Wheat Ridge, you wouldn't know, because under most license setups, you would under the license it says the city of Wheat Ridge gives you a license to do this, and we understand you're going to operate this way, and you're going to charge people to buy this product, but we're not doing that.
No, what I'm hearing so far anyhow is business license, but that's true already. If it's a business you're going to operate in the city, you don't need, none of this matters. It could be a business to do that. It could be a business to sell lava lamps, something else from the 70s. And, if you're selling that and you're charging X dollars for the lava lamp or the whatever, then that's a retail sale that the city's already, is ready to do. Now, as things evolve and they say, well, we're really not selling the medicine, we're selling the therapy, the medicine's free. You can decide as a city, and this is for later, but you can decide as a city whether you want to drill down into that a little bit and see if there's really a sales tax that the city might want to be able to be collecting. But if you've got 3 of these operations in the next 10 years, that may not be a good use of the city's time to pursue that.
Under the state statute, the DCRIM statute, you are allowed to grow these medicines on private property. So if your office is set up in a business park, you can grow these medicines in your office. Okay.
Yes, I think that's right. You could grow
And
mushrooms.
that's, I don't know, it's
Yeah.
a little troubling.
From a regulatory standpoint, I guess it'd be useful for me to hear how you feel about the zoning approach that a number of council members have embraced.
And then that's my follow-up question on if we say that, okay, we're going to allow these businesses in these certain very clearly defined zones, then does it not become a use by right where they can simply open one up without having to get any sort of approval?
Sure. If the city council chooses to put a P there, permitted, in those zone districts, similar to the permitted uses that are presently allowed in those zone districts, the ones I'm kind of looking at would be the analogy would, where the medical clinics are. That's a use by right. You just get if you're in that zone district, you're allowed to conduct that use. What I'm hearing is in that zone district, but obviously business license, that always is true. Hours of operation for this particular kind of business is 7 p.m. And I would say if you're going to do that, I think it's actually probably in your interest and in the interest of public health to say, all administration sessions have to have been concluded by the time the business closes. And because that, again, that's a person that's not well able to care for themselves during that period of time. And so you would want, if you have hours of operation, I would suggest that we actually affirmatively say that.
So we would be creating something that we would put in our code that says, here's the type of business we're looking at, here's where they're going to be allowed, here's some of the licensing involved. But there would be something added that instead of just like, oh, okay,
Permitted
you go
use.
ahead and build one here.
Yeah, and that is true already, and we forget that where we have permitted uses, that use is permitted, but then we have a whole bunch of supplementary regulations around, and I'd have to, in a minute, think of an example, but supplementary regulations saying if this is the kind of use that you're doing that's permitted in the various zone districts, the hours of operation are this, you have to have the following requirements around odor or ventilation or lighting, and so it would be a similar thing here to say if you're conducting a natural medicine facilitation center, then the hours of operation, have to conclude by 7 p.m. at night, and all administration sessions as defined by state statute, and we can just rely on the state statute to define administration session, have to conclude by that time. And that's a small paragraph, but I think it's an important one, and it really works well, I think, in connection with our zoning approach here.
Thank you. I've got Counselor Hoppy and then Counselor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It took me forever to find it, but I thought I'd read it. I just read so many words today. But there is a regulation that there are requirements to ensure that participants has a discharge plan for safe transportation from the healing center. So that's already part of it. So I don't even know that we necessarily need to put a specific time on closing. But also, as far as capping the licenses, it doesn't say it specifically, but I was like, I felt like I read somewhere that said that we couldn't do that, but it says a local jurisdiction may not prohibit an establishment or operation of license within, up to this Article 50, within its boundaries. So to me, that makes me wonder if we can even cap, if we can even have a cap. And so for those two things that were brought up, but for the zoning, some people said only where medical offices are allowed, but I would tell you that not a lot of maybe therapist offices are next to a hospital or where medical offices are. And so I would caution that we use that language and that we don't use that language, and that if we are looking at doing something around zoning, that we go with the commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning that is not within 1,000 feet located of a school or a daycare, which they're not allowed to do anyways. I would caution us on the times, just because of the safe transportation home piece anyways. And then I would think that I don't think would be allowed, I'm saying I don't think would be allowed to do caps. Now, the difference, though, between this and the marijuana was that we were legally allowed as a municipality to charge our own extra whatever tax we wanted on top of those licenses. And so you'll notice that the city of Edgewater was literally paving their streets with marijuana money, right, because of the way that they were taxing them. So that's also not allowable in this. So that's why I would like really steer away from the different licensing. Yes, they have to have a business license, but they're licensed at the state. So if we really want to take a look at where these are in our community, we can go to the state licenses to take a look at that.
Thank you. I've got Counselor Weaver and then Counselor Dozeman on deck.
I'm supportive of what Ms. Hoppy just stated. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Dozeman.
Thank you. So my question is more in regards to, so this regulates natural medicines, but I have heard of ketamine and LSD also being used for therapeutic reasons. And so this does not regulate in any way, shape, or form those medicines. Would it be possible for these healing centers to include that, or would they need to be completely separate?
I've got the definition of natural medicine out of the statute, and I'm fairly confident saying no, not LSD, not even peyote. So I think I would be really, I think the, so LSD by any other name, I think would not be able, those kinds of psychedelics would not be able to be considered natural medicine. And I think the state has drawn that line. We'll see how hard it is for them to maintain that line as new medicines are fabricated. But that's the game they're really in, and they've really embraced, with a fair amount of detail. So I think on balance, I think we can rely upon them for that reason.
I had a couple of questions myself. We, in a number of our place restrictions in other forms in the code, we talk about, we add parks in there. Is that, I'm not sure why we add parks into these particular things, but is that something that would be cogent in this discussion?
I believe parks were added with a buffer for marijuana uses as well as for tobacco retailer license, with the policy intent that those are areas where children are located. And so because it's a retail storefront for marijuana and tobacco, the idea was to try to keep that further away from where kiddos and families might be congregating. Because this is not a retail storefront, it may be a slightly different implication, but it's certainly something we could include in our local code if you.
Absolutely have the power to do it. That's clearly a time, place, and manner restriction.
Yeah, we hadn't discussed it, so I thought I'd just bring it up. I don't know how the feeling of the council might be. The other one is that has the state completed, started, or is in the process of rulemaking on this? Do you know?
I appreciate that question. I think they're still in the process of rulemaking. The hesitation you hear in my voice is I'm not sure that they were to have commenced rulemaking September 30th. But, it's pretty complicated. At the same time, they have a January 1 people can apply deadline. So in a perfect world, they needed to have had their rules in place so they could start accepting applications. That's not something I should have checked that today, and I did not.
That's okay. We've had a pretty good discussion. Councilor Larson, I see your name.
One more quick question as we proceed down this road here. I did read about one of the, another town in, I forget which town it is in Colorado, that there was some pushback against allowing this in their town because they were looking at the election results from 2023, and they looked at their local community support for referendum Proposition 122 in 2023. And I wonder if we might be able to find out, to look in the election archives from 2023 to see how that Proposition 122, how it fared in Wheat Ridge.
We could certainly look. From just a timing standpoint, and I know you're getting ready for a consensus, which I really appreciate, and I'll wait for that. But from a timing standpoint, I mentioned earlier that there's some chance, I think it's not huge, that there'll be, licenses approved right after the first of the year. You have a 2 reading requirement. We have 1 meeting in December yet, and no second meeting, but a first meeting. It would be the second Monday in January, which would be the, I'm sorry, the 18th? Is that the second one? 13th. So while we could do an emergency ordinance a week from tonight, that might be more than necessary. And what I'm thinking is first reading ordinance, then the second reading ordinance can be your first meeting in January, and we can just have it effective upon adoption. We do that frequently, the charter allows, and you'd be in place really pretty quickly. I think that's probably the right level of speed, but I wanted to share that with you.
I had another question from Counselor Weaver, and I've got Counselor Hoppy on deck. You're good, Counselor Hoppy?
I was going to try to craft a consensus.
Okay.
I'd like to ask for a consensus to move forward with regulating I just forgot. The healing centers by utilizing the 1,000-foot buffer of schools, daycares, and adding parks in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning. Oh, okay. Would you like to discuss parks real fast?
Counselor Goldstein?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you bringing up parks, and I think to Ms. Mikulak's point, inclusion of parks and the regulations around tobacco is, not only like exposure to people buying it, but then a lot of times, people will purchase it and then go over to the park to smoke it and use it. So what we're talking about is a discrete private experience that really doesn't have exposure, that has a lot of regulation. And so I've actually heard from constituents of the things we're talking about tonight. This is the one thing I heard both sides on. And I mean, there are a lot of people who really want to have access to this therapeutic modality. It's a business development for some therapists who are already practicing. And I worry that if we don't have a map in front of us that shows how parks would impact that, and if all of a sudden it takes all of the, land where, Lutheran's located, I mean, we have a lot of really good locations where we would want these to be located so that people are getting, good access to good services where they can easily access it. So I hesitate, I wouldn't support parks unless we actually had a map about it. And I'm not actually feeling the same concern because we're not talking about retail exposure, which just feels really different to me than liquor sales, marijuana sales, tobacco sales. So in this instance, I don't feel like the park exposure is of the same things. I would not support parks, but otherwise support the consensus you were bringing forward.
Counselor Hoppy, would you like to continue with your consensus?
Yes, I would. I'd like to move forward with trying to move forward with the consensus to regulating healing centers and a 1,000-foot buffer between schools and daycares in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use zoning.
And do you see any time framework, or do you think that's covered in the other ordinance?
I think it's pretty covered in the other ordinance.
Okay. Mr. Dahl, does that give you the information you need?
It does. Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. And Ms. Mikulak mentioned to me that because this would be a change in Chapter 26, that triggers the requirement for the Planning Commission to review it. But we have done occasionally in the past, and I would recommend it here, and we will do it, where Planning Commission obviously won't meet between now and the 9th of December, but we can get this in front of them in between first and second reading so that we have the recommendation in hand before second reading. That's a system that's been done before where we've got some time constraints, and we'll do that. Thank you.
Any further discussion on this item? Thank you very much. Good discussion. So we will now move to agenda item number 3. This is a discussion on unclaimed property. Director Mikulak.
It's Mr. Dahl again for this one. Thank you.
It's me again. And for something very different again, but this should be a shorter discussion. Mr. Goff got a random letter dated October the 8th from Aaron McCauley in the state treasurer's office saying, hello, if you have unclaimed property, you have to report on it and give it to us. Okay. That's the first time I've ever seen the state treasurer's office get interested in this. But there is, as I said, this common law rule that unclaimed property that's held by the government or unclaimed property escheats to the state, meaning is forfeited to the state. And every now and again, you'll hear from Treasurer Jerry DiTullio saying, okay, I'm working hard at getting money back to the people who kind of abandon it. And that's very important. That's a really important function, I think, both of the state and the county treasurers. But I've not heard of the county treasurers reaching out before on this, and I'd not been aware of the statute, but I did look at it and have analyzed it. And the bottom line is this: the statute says, okay, all I'm really interested in, says the state treasurer, is money, is cash or cash equivalents. And interestingly, one little exception, the contents of a safe deposit box, which would be jewels and, various things. But that has to be coughed up as well. It's the one tangible personal property as opposed to intangible cash that the state treasurer says you've got to report on and give to me. The state treasurer doesn't want either a report or to be given things like bicycles and snowmobiles and e-bikes that get abandoned. Just show me the money is the state treasurer's kind of approach. And that's fine. But the statute goes on to say, okay, a local government would be a county or municipality that has a resolution or ordinance on the books that does these few things at the bottom of the first page of my memo, doesn't have to cough up the cash. Just give me a very short report every November saying you're holding this money and that if it isn't claimed, you will keep it. And I have looked at the city's ordinances on these subjects. There's a fairly detailed ordinance, I think, in Title 19 that the police department uses to get rid of evidence. They have a lot of bicycles and whatnot, and it's actually a good program that they arrange for the bicycles and whatnot that don't get claimed or given away under a regime. It looks to be a little more complex than necessary, but the state treasurer's statute and concern does not involve that. While I was at it, I looked at that, and I intend to speak with the chief about whether the process in our code matches up with how they actually do it, because it looks a lot more complex, I think, than maybe necessary. And I'll follow up with them, but that's not driven by this letter. The thing that's driven by the letter is, to the extent the city has cash, is it able to retain it? And the answer is yes, if we do a few changes to the ordinance, and I've shown that on the second page. We need to define unclaimed cash or cash equivalents and say that they're, as long as, and say we will hold them for 5 years, because that's the state limit, that we should include a separate definition of unclaimed tangible property, which we can dispose of in any way we choose under a shorter schedule. And right now, our code section, which is 1-5, has this, I think, unwieldy notice process that says publish in the paper the list and then reach out to people. That's not required by the state statute. I'd like to suggest a more streamlined notice procedure, probably letter to the last known owner rather than publishing some. It's just a waste of money to publish a notice in the paper saying, hi, we're holding $33,000 as a result of a SIA deposit that never was used. And we've had it for 5 years now. Can we, I would rather that we have a notice procedure to whatever the last address and name is that we have. And if we don't get anything back, then we can declare it unclaimed and be able to put it into the city's general fund after 5 years. So my recommendation request would be that I bring forward an ordinance tuning up our 2 code sections on unclaimed property in the manner described in my November 26th memo.
Okay, Councilor Weaver.
I am completely in support of this. Thank you very much.
Councilor Hoppy.
Thank you. I also am in complete support of this. I also would just ask if maybe we speak to the chief, because you'd said tangible property at a shorter schedule. I know that at a certain point we had storage issues.
Yeah.
So if he would like to maybe change that and this changes while we're there, maybe get his opinion on what he'd like to change that. I'd also like to point out that the state did this on July 1st of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah. I'll definitely talk to the chief. I know evidence storage room is just a perennial issue for them, and we'll make it as streamlined as possible. We'll be able to move that stuff out when we no longer need it for court, or it's clear that it's not going to get picked up.
Councilor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor, and yes, I fully support the direction that you wanted to take this. It does, when you mentioned the safe deposit box, it reminds me of like the TV show Storage Wars, where there's all this property that has been abandoned, and somebody has to do something with it. My question, though, is, are we talking about a lot of money? Is typically, does the amount, more than make a difference? Is it a rounding error? Is it?
Every now and again, there is real live money. There was, it was a number of years ago now that community development reached out to me and said, we're holding cash that developers have posted in lieu of, subdivision improvements, et cetera, that we've not been able to spend because of various reasons, or people secure the construction of public improvements as they must. And the city sometimes needs to cash in that and use it to build stuff, and sometimes not, because the developer has built the improvement, but it was an LLC, right, that did that small development, and that person sold the lots and was disappeared and forgot that they've deposited this money. So every now and again, I think it's a real, it's in the tens of thousands occasionally is what's deposited. And it only takes one of those developments to forget, for whatever reason, to get it collected before they wind up the LLC, to have that be unclaimed at the city.
And if we go through this process and after 5 years, the money becomes a property of the city of Wheat Ridge, where does that money go?
General fund.
In the general fund?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Dahl, am I correct when I read this sentence from the letter of the state, the guy from the state, that they had a change in the law of July 1st, 2020, and as a result, the Colorado Treasury no longer has statute authority over tangible property not held within a safe deposit box and will no longer be accepted from the state? So they're only retrieving the contents of safe deposit boxes. Now, where do we know where these safe deposit boxes are located within the city of Wheat Ridge?
Well, the only ones I can think of would be maintained by banks.
Okay.
And banks increasingly aren't maintaining, providing that service.
Right.
I think there still are some. I had to get some things out of a safe deposit box in Arizona for an estate of a family member, and so there are still banks that do that, and that was Wells Fargo. And they, to the extent we've got a Wells Fargo branch here that is maintaining safe deposit boxes, there could be unclaimed funds there. The degree to which the city is aware that there's even that the safe deposit box has sat there that long, you have to wait for the bank to tell you, I suppose.
And does the bank have an obligation to notify the state if
Yes, because they are a quote holder of that money or of those contents.
Right.
And after that time has passed, they're obligated. City's a holder, but so are banks and private institutions and private persons, conceivably, that are holding unclaimed funds from somewhere else. Well, so yeah, they are obligated under the statute.
The state is only concerned with what's in a safe deposit box and the things that the city has. The city doesn't have any safe deposit boxes, right?
No, it does not.
So they don't have any claim on any of the property that we make.
No, that's true. We don't now I understand your question. The city doesn't maintain any safe deposit boxes, so there's no way we could have unclaimed items in a safe deposit box, any control over it.
Right.
So for the city, it would be money deposited with the city for various purposes. The one that most easily comes to mind is land development, subdivision improvement funds. But there could be, a tax refund, sales tax refund that we're processing, and now we have that money. Oops, we collected too much. We've done a self-audit within the 3 years that we're allowed to. It's $5,000 to that company, but the company's since gone out of business and has closed their storefront. We've got this tax refund that we need to know what to do with. So that would be another example of unclaimed funds we would have. The police department, seizes cash in a drug deal or in a car that they seize, and that's unclaimed Those are funds that, unless we can find the proper owner, would fall into this category.
but not being in a safe deposit box. So they're going after funds that are not in a safe deposit box?
Well,
Or,
the state is saying that the unclaimed property we care about is cash or cash equivalents. And by the way, things in safe deposit boxes. And I think the social policy behind that is because even though the stuff in safe deposit boxes might be other than currency, if it's diamonds, we want it. I think that even, yes, it's a tangible thing, just like a bicycle, but
yeah,
think
well,
we
I can
want
see
that.
where they would want everything that's in a safe deposit box, but when I read this paragraph, it looks to me like that this new regulation, the RUPA, R-U-U-P-A,
Right.
as contents contained within a safe deposit box. So
Yes.
if those diamonds were in a safe deposit box, then we'd need to turn them over to the state, but if they were in our evidence room, we wouldn't.
That's correct. That's
And if we
absolutely
have-
right.
If we have cash from deposits that people have given us, those are not payable to the state.
As so long as we're able to adjust our ordinances to be able to keep the money for 5
Okay.
years.
But I mean, the operable component is safe deposit box?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
It's an interesting little wrinkle, and I've told you why. I think the state said, well, we don't want to deal with physical things, but we don't mind dealing with a physical thing if it's in a safe deposit box because it might have high value.
Well, I've had my bank shut down and I had to find a new safe deposit box, so.
Yep.
All right. Any further discussion on this item? We have direction do you have the direction that you need
I
to
do.
get this accomplished?
I do, thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
All right.
That concludes agenda item number 3. Let's go. Now we're going to go to staff reports. Turning to staff.
I don't have any staff report tonight. Thank you for
Oh, I'm
having
sorry.
me.
Okay. Well, we will turn to
for
elected
having me.
officials' reports, and I'm sure there's a report here somewhere. Counselor Hopping.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Hulteen and I would like to ask to bring forward to a future study session after the traffic state model is adopted to look at a regulation around the Class 2 e-bikes. If they are found to have their governors either removed or didn't have one in the first place, and to work with our police department in a warning / enforcement type way with those bikes.
Additional, Mr. Counselor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor. District 2 is going to have their quarterly meeting this Saturday at the Grange from 9 to 10. So weather doesn't matter.
Okay. Counselor Hulteen.
Thanks. I hope to see plenty of District 2 folk on Saturday morning, which is, of course, just hours before the tree lighting ceremony, the festivities in the late afternoon. I just wanted to recognize, I feel like Wheat Ridge is just like it's like everywhere I look, not just because I live here. I'm a member of the International Association for Public Participation, and I got my little email with an upcoming event, and it's Wheat Ridge presenting its Let's Talk program to the Colorado chapter of the International Association of Public Participation. So our Let's Talk program is always noteworthy, and a whole bunch of people are going to tune in January to learn more about it, but just really proud of the work that we do and that other communities are learning from our leadership and how to engage our community. And so just super proud of that. And I will hopefully see a lot of people not in the room tonight and others in the room on Saturday at various things. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Weaver.
Just want to thank District 2 and all of the people who came to visit the goats at Happiness Gardens. They will be leaving on Wednesday morning, so come early if you want to help with that process, or you might say goodbye to them on Tuesday. They like pieces of carrot and cut up apples, but they really like their visit to District 2, so thank you.
Okay. Additional elected officials matters. Counselor Snell.
Just quickly, another plug for the holiday celebration coming up this Saturday. IDEA Committee will be in attendance. Be sure and come by and see us. We're going to be inside in the ballroom, and we have a fun activity. So it'll be the IDEA Committee's first foray into being in the public space. So looking forward to it.
Terrific. Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And after spending the last week on the road, visiting friends and family for the holiday, it is good to be home, back in Wheat Ridge. Anyway, I would also like to recommend that a study session consider an amendment that Councilor Dozeman and I are considering on vehicle. It has to do with vehicles. It'll be after the model traffic is considered and approved. So this would be down the road, but it would be an amendment to the city code requiring all cars to have bumpers. Thank you.
Okay. We'll have our tree lighting ceremony this Saturday at 6:15, but the festivities start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you, at the Wheat Ridge Rec Center, that's right. Okay, if there's no more business to come before us, we will have be here at a regular meeting 1 week from tonight at 6:30. So travel safely through our streets. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, good job, man. You will.